Good evening to everybody and a warm welcome on this Saturday, the 25th of October. It is the second of the two winter updates. Next up will be the official release of the 25-26 winter forecast. So how is everybody doing this evening? We have got something a little bit more wintry. Not for all, in fact. There's probably quite a lot of people that are kind of saying, what's all the fuss about? You know, it's a little bit cooler than what it has been. But generally speaking, we have got an Arctic air mass that is driving southwards and providing a little bit more of a nip in the air, it has to be said. So how is folks doing on this fine Saturday evening? Good evening all, says City Andy. City Andy also saying, looking forward to winter, hoping for some decent cold weather, not endless southwesterly rubbish. That is certainly true, I have to admit, Andy. Let's hope anyway. Turbo Stream saying, good evening all. Not been in here for a while. Good evening, and it is good to see yourself, Turbo Stream, on this evening's chat. Good evening to our very own Paul James. Thanks for tuning in, and also thank you for moderating. Lindsay is working hard this evening over in Dingwall, so she will not be joining us. She might pop on, I don't know, but she will not be on the chat proper this evening. So we've got Jason's Meditation Journeys. Good evening to yourself. Good evening all, says Jason. Pip Goddard. Good evening all. Also Jason saying, I've not been at a live for ages, but always watch them back. Keep up the great work, Mark. I love the content. Thank you very much, Jason. I do greatly appreciate that, my friend. And a warm welcome to you. Good evening to Braemar, Ballard, D-side and Donside Weather. How are you getting on, Chris? I hope you are enjoying your weekend. And also, Chris saying, I've taken holidays 25th and 4th of December. So send me some cold weather. Yep, that certainly would be nice to see, my friend. And thank you very much also for the kind donation as well. So, yes, we will do a little bit of usual chit-chat, and then we will get into it. We'll actually kind of quickly touch on the weather happening at the moment. What can we expect over the next few days? We may see some frost. We will certainly feel a cold wind coming down from the north. And then we've also got a little feature that is going to ride that northwesterly airflow in over during the course of tomorrow, so that's going to kind of reinforce the chill. Looks as if the chill is going to hold till at least Tuesday, and then we will revert to something a little bit more westerly yet again. So it is a relatively brief spell of early autumn Arctic chill, and then we will wait and see what happens in the run-up to Halloween. Do we see some stormy weather coming back? That is going to be the question. Good evening to Bernard Richmond as well. Good evening to yourself. Great work, says Bernard. Thank you very much. Delighted to say that I have now reached 7,000 subscribers for the first time in the channel's history. The channel has been going since May 2010, so a new benchmark, which I'm delighted about. It just goes to show that people are enjoying what they're seeing here on this channel. Certainly the ideas tonight is going to be very much fair, balanced, and also as honest as I possibly can. I'm not going to hype this up. I'm not going to suggest that we've got a brutal 09-10 Arctic winter on the way, but there is certainly elements to be optimistic. There is some aspects to perhaps be a little bit concerned about if you're really hoping for an 09-10 repeat. We will wait and see what happens. Turbo Stream saying, Saturday evenings suit me better. I take part in a live stream on Sundays about veg growing at 6 p.m, so can't always make Sunday afternoons. yeah, I totally appreciate that, and it's very much dependent on my wife and I's work schedule. Well, I get a Saturday, Sunday off, but my wife works, well, she's working at the moment, so hence why I'm doing the live stream today. If she happens to be off on the Sunday, it works better for doing a Saturday evening live stream and vice versa. So it's very much dependent on the old personal life. So, if you can make it, fantastic. If you can't, well, you can always try and watch it back at your leisure. I know it's not quite the same. I watch a lot of live shows on YouTube as well, and it is always good to engage with the live chat and the conversation and whatnot. So it is always good to be able to tune in, and if, like I say, if you can't, then that is no problem. Good evening to the Hazelnut. Hello everyone from a windy Aberdeenshire coast. Yeah, certainly was pretty rough. One of my colleagues that is based in Aberdeen drove down to Glasgow last night, and he said it was pretty brutal actually driving down the A90. Not so bad really driving down the A9. I must admit it was windy, but nothing exceptional, nothing to be concerned about or anything. But certainly on the east coast with Storm Benjamin spinning over the North Sea, that is providing some pretty strong north to northeasterly winds, and that was certainly the case even today. We've obviously got low pressure now well into the Denmark area. With higher pressure to the west, we're seeing that discharge of Arctic air down over the UK. Good evening to John Bevan. Good to see you, my friend. John says, "Hi Mark, would a warm November mean a mild winter?" That is the golden question, John. To be honest with you, there is times that I struggle a little bit with this kind of, warm September, mild winter. Certainly, we did see back a couple of years ago a record warm September. Then it eventually did turn out to be quite a mild winter following that, if memory serves me correctly. What I want to say is that in the last couple of winters, done not too bad during the first half and the middle, but then February has quite often threw the forecast completely out the window. That is something that I'm taking into consideration this year because La Nina is expected to peak probably. We'll look at this in a second, but La Nina is expected to peak early in the winter time and then return to likely neutral conditions within the equatorial Pacific during January and February. La Nina winters quite often tend to be cold in the first half and then milder in the second half. El Nino is the opposite, milder first half and colder second half. But I'm a little bit nervous about the prospects of a third winter where February has completely blown me out of the water. You factor in such things as sudden stratospheric warmings. If that was to occur in January, you could potentially have a particularly notable cold spell late January and into the month of February. But while that was anticipated last year, it didn't materialise, and we ended up being very mild indeed during the month of February. So these are all aspects that I have to try and take into consideration this upcoming season. Fantastic achievement, says Paul James, for the 7,000 subscribers. Thank you very much, Paul. And Turbo Stream likewise saying the same thing, City Andy as well. So a massive appreciation for all the love out there. It is fantastic stuff. We've got 42 concurrent viewers at the moment. You know what I'm going to say next? I'll say it anyway. Hit that like button. Help me get to 100 likes because that certainly helps push the video out on the recommended videos side of YouTube. So it would be much appreciated if you can hit that like button and help me reach 100 likes on this live stream this evening. So good evening to William McHenry over in nearby Allness. Hope you're well, Will, and your good lady Catherine as well. Hi Mark, how are you? Very bitter north wind. Is that a sign for the winter ahead? Thanks so much, Will and Catherine McHenry. Just at the moment anyway, Will, just because we're getting this shot of cold air doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to lead to anything down the road. But we'll look at the details in a little second. Good evening to Riddle as well. So did an interesting little trip up Ben Wyvis. Let's have a quick check back at that. So just before we crack on, so last Saturday I enjoyed a little walk up and around Ben Wyvis, Farish Hill, which is just about 4-ish miles to the north of here. Ben Wyvis, incidentally, is only about roughly 40-minute drive from here to the car park. I did Ben Wyvis back in 2019. I did manage to achieve the summit, and delighted about that. Back in 2018, I actually managed to do 40 Munros. That is mountains in excess of 3,000 feet here in Scotland, for folks that perhaps don't know. But got geared up this afternoon, got up nice and sharp after working the night shift as usual. And I did. You can see the snow here. This was this afternoon. This is Ben Wyvis, like I said, just north of Inverness. Beautiful scenes. We had the wintry showers blowing through. They did lie as snow, probably at an elevation of about 2,000 feet roughly. I managed to reach the snow line. Now listen, that's the water. Beautiful scenery. Just that solitude, that getting away from it all, getting away from TVs and heating in the house, and just getting that breath of fresh air into your lungs is a fantastic feeling. I didn't quite make the summit. The wind was pretty strong, it has to be said, and perhaps a little bit of lack of fitness. It is the first attempt at a Munro since 2019, so you're talking 6 years since the last time. The old knees were pretty sore, I must admit, as well. But I want to play this video here. So look at the beautiful views here. But I want to play you this quickly, this video. Listen if you can hear the sound of the wind. Down at low levels, hardly a breath. Well, there was a breeze, but it wasn't too bad. In exposure, fairly gusty wind, I must admit. But once you got further up into the hill itself and the open terrain, you really did notice. I think the summit temperature was around a -2, wind chill -10, -11. So, yep, a little bit of a reminder that winter is coming fairly quickly. Beautiful and wild, says the hazelnut. Yes, it is a fantastic part of the world, I must admit. Very, lucky that we've got this on our doorstep up here in the north. Very briefly, let's have a quick look at the current temperatures and the weather over the next couple of days, and then we will get into the meat and bones of it. So these are the current temperatures as of 10 to 7, or 10 to 8, should I say, on this Saturday, the 25th of October. Single figure temperatures up and down the majority of the UK. We've got this strong wind which is keeping the temperatures from dropping particularly low. But if you factor in the air temp and the wind, this is the current wind chills. So we're in low single figures, even down towards the south of England. If you notice here, we're talking about that air temp versus wind generating 3, 4, 5, 6 Celsius wind chills here, even down across the far south. Good evening to Hebridean. Good to see you on today, this evening's stream. So that is that. Let's have a look at the current models then for the next few days, at least anyway. So we're talking about some chilly 850 temperatures or 5,000 foot level temperatures dropping southwards. The cold is going to continue to drive south over the next 24 hours or so. Then we have a feature that runs in from the northwest during the course of tomorrow. That then is going to kind of reinforce another shot of cold air. This is off the GFS model. That system then runs down that northwesterly airflow, and then we've got colder air coming in on the back side of that. So that's going to reinforce the chilly feel in the air. Then as we move into the day, Monday and Tuesday, you notice here that we're starting to turn our winds more kind of westerly rather than northwesterly or northerly. That then cuts off that flow from the north, and we will see something a little bit more in the way of milder conditions. You can see here as we progress through the course of next week, we're going to pull our air in from the opposite direction. Instead of north, we're going to see southerly flow. Go over to the overview chart then, skip back, play through the loop here. So we've got that low to the east, high to the west situation. Down comes that feature from the north. That is going to reinforce that chilly feel, kind of, as I said already. Then we've got this next feature that runs in, according to the GFS, during the course of Tuesday. Then we start to see more of a westerly flow developing here, and then the possibility of some deep areas of low pressure. Look at these here, 958 millibar low, close to the northwest of the UK during the course of Saturday next weekend. Now, the important thing to factor in is the MJO, the Magellan Oscillation, is becoming stronger. And with a phase 2-3, which it progressed through, so that is the central and eastern Indian Ocean, when you've got that phase 2 and 3 of the MJO, that quite often correlates to stormy weather across the UK and Ireland and western areas of Europe. And that is what is looking likely, as we progress through the next week or so here. So generally speaking, we revert more to a milder pattern towards the middle portions of the upcoming week, then much more unsettled and milder during the back half of next week in the run up to Halloween and the beginning of November. Obviously, Bonfire Night coming up as well. Do we want to talk about winter? Let's get into it then. So I'm going to click on to the article, and let's get into it then. So this is freely available on marfoganweather.com, so you can check that out and look through it. I'm going to try and make this as fairly simple as possible. I felt as if the first update back at the end of September was a little bit long-winded, a little complex. I'm not saying that people don't understand it, but I want to make it more universally understandable. Now, there is still going to be elements that make it a little bit difficult for some folks, but this is giving you the background. This is giving you the reasoning behind why I think the evidence to support the ideas that I'm beginning to build for the upcoming winter season. So there's not going to be any more winter updates. I'm going to go straight to the official winter forecast that will get released in a live stream back at the end of November. It'll be Sunday the 30th of November at 4 p.m. That will be when the official forecast gets released. So this has been released on the website literally in the last 15 minutes or so here. So like I say, in this second winter update, I wish to make it more thoughts-based on what was discussed in the first update, and based on the latest drivers that we know that are in place at the moment, what the potential implications of that may be this upcoming winter season. So what do we have in the playing field globally at the moment here? What are the factors that we're looking at? We are looking at La Nina. That is reforming once again after it was in a neutral state back last winter. We never really truly got a proper La Nina last year. Kind of remained fairly neutral. We've also got an easterly QBO, or easterly winds within the stratosphere blowing over the equator. And we've also got the warm over cold North Pacific and a fading of the Indian Ocean dipole negative. These factors all together support potential weakness in the polar vortex. So this is basically the graphic that I create with all the players on the field. Let's move on then. We've obviously got a very warm over cold North Pacific. We've also got a very warm North Atlantic at the moment here. So these are the important considerations for the upcoming 25-26 winter. We're firmly at least in a weak La Nina territory. through the end of this year, but this weakens or fades during the winter season. There's a lot of focus through the winter on the Arctic and North Atlantic oscillations. A lot of people get excited about a negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation. That then in turn can lead to colder weather, not only in the middle latitudes, but over this part of the world here. But it's important to remember what drives this positive, neutral, negative phases of both the Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation. This is going to explain a little bit more about that. So let's start with the La Nina. It appears likely to peak, like I say. So these are the water temperatures within the equatorial Pacific. When they're colder than average, that is La Nina conditions, especially a half to a full degree or even a degree and a half below average. That would be weak, moderate, or strong in terms of La Nina. The opposite is the case with an El Nino, where you've got the warming within the equatorial Pacific, starting from South America, working towards the international dateline in the West Pacific. So it's likely to peak La Nina, cold waters, either a -1, which is at the moment, to perhaps -1.5. That is meant to be not 1.1. Can we see this? Let's see if I can blow this up just a fraction for people to be able to see, but I don't want to blow it up too much. Is that okay? And I take it my face isn't blocking that off. Yeah, that should be a little bit better, isn't it? Let me know in the comments below what you think. We've got 48 concurrent viewers at the moment here. If you've just tuned in, warm welcome. So yeah, let me see here. So you can see here, this is the multi-model system projected sea surface temperatures globally, but through November, December, January of 25-26. You can see here, very warm globally, water temperatures for the November through January period. The standout is the cold waters within the equatorial Pacific here. So this is quite important here. And I'll talk about position of that cold water and the implications that may have as well. So these are all the models here, or the major models: ECMWF, the Met Office, Meteo France, CMCC, DWD, NCEP, JMA, ECCC, BOM, which is Bureau of Meteorology. These are all these models combined into one, and this is the overall outcome. So you can see here the cold waters within the equatorial Pacific, representative of La Nina, and this is through the first half of the upcoming winter. So November, so the latter half of autumn through December and January. Notice the blue, and then if we look at the December through February period, you notice the weakening, the less strong blue over the equatorial Pacific. This is all the models suggesting that we are going to see a weakening of those cold waters, the La Nina signal in the equatorial Pacific. Another factor to consider is the position of that. You can have La Nina water temperatures closer to South America and then further west towards the central Pacific. The position of this cold pool is very important, and I'll lead on to that in just a second. So we are expecting to see a weakness in the La Nina through the winter season, but we start off with La Nina conditions. We still have a very warm, we had a record strong marine heat wave extending from Japan all the way across to North America through the summer and the first half of autumn. We remain firmly warmer than average throughout the North Pacific, with a cold, under signal here, or whatever you want to call it. So you've got the warm over the cold La Nina signal. We've got this continued negative Pacific decadal oscillation as well. Now, this warm North Pacific, cold waters underneath, is likely to play a significant role in the upcoming winter season, not just in the Pacific region, but globally, when you've got that type of situation. So along with La Nina, we have a pretty strong easterly QBO, or quasi-biennial oscillation. Like I've already said, these are the winds within the stratosphere. So way up above the troposphere where our weather resides. Within the stratosphere, over the equator, equatorial belt, we've got winds that go from easterly to westerly, and that reverses in a general 36-month period. We had strong westerlies in the belt within the stratosphere over the equator last year. We're now in a firm easterly QBO, and this graphic here from Singapore represents those easterly winds within the stratosphere over the equator here. So basically the winds coming in from an easterly direction. This is a balloon reading from Singapore, which is very close to the equator. And you can see here that the blue line here being to the left of this axis here suggests that we've got a strong easterly QBO. This is as of the 2nd of October. Our very own Richard Schrott shared this interesting graphic. He made up this chart here a few weeks ago showing that we're in a strong easterly phase of the QBO. And you can see that we were firmly positive, which meant we had westerly winds within the stratosphere over the equator. That is now reversed to an easterly over the equator. And we're pretty strong here, down towards minus 24.26. So you can see that here, very strong drop-off showing the strength of those easterly winds over the equator and within the stratosphere. So the recent strong east QBO winters, similar to current. So sorry, just bear with a second here. I'm reading this off at the same time. So the recent QBO winters, similar to the current, include 2009-10. So the strength of that easterly QBO, I'll get there in the end. Strength of the easterly QBO winter now compares with 2009-10. That was a highly blocked and frequently cold winter. 2014-15, cold in the US, but zonal and frequently stormy in the UK. Now, this is quite important here. That 14-15. 2023-24, equally a strong East QBO, or similar to what we have now. Stormy, mild, with spells of cold for the UK. So the strength of the East QBO, similar to 2009-10, that was a cold winter. Also similar to 2014-15, that was a cold USA, but a zonal stormy UK. And then at 2023-24, we had a bit of a mixture, stormy, mild, but with some cold spells. The trio of La Nina and negative Indian Ocean dipoles, that is when you've got cold waters in the west portion of the Indian Ocean, you've got warm waters in the east portion of the Indian Ocean. That represents a negative Indian Ocean dipole. Another aspect to consider here, when you have the reversal, you've got cold waters near Indonesia, the east side of the Indian Ocean, you've got warm waters in the west side of the Indian Ocean. That's a positive Indian Ocean dipole. And there is studies out there that relate that positive Indian Ocean dipole to a stronger polar vortex over the Arctic. Equally so, when you've got a negative Indian Ocean dipole, that can relate to a weaker polar vortex within the Arctic. But combine La Nina, Indian Ocean dipole negative, and an easterly QBO, this supports a weaker polar vortex. And this little diagram here below shows that when you've got a westerly QBO, you tend to have a stronger polar vortex, and the opposite is the case with an easterly QBO. So winter lovers out there, this is something that is grabbing your attention probably, that trio of La Nina, Indian Ocean dipole and QBO leads to, or greatens the chance at least, of seeing a weakened polar vortex. Weakened polar vortex can release Arctic air into the mid latitudes, create a cold spell, negative Arctic oscillation, North Atlantic oscillation. But there is caveats to that as well, and I'll show you that in a second here. So this is a nice little diagram as well. Westerly QBO suggests a strengthening of the jet stream, and also a strengthening of the polar vortex. So when you've got in unison winds blowing within the stratosphere, both over the Arctic and over the equator, blowing in a westerly direction, tends to give the jet stream in between through the mid latitudes a bit of a kick, bit of an acceleration here, when you've got that strong cold pull over the Arctic, and you've got that westerly QBO here, so those winds within the stratosphere over the equator. Very different story when you've got an easterly QBO. Now, not all easterly QBOs weaken the polar vortex, it has to be said. But like I've kind of said already, I'm trying my best not to repeat myself, but within the stratosphere and only the stratosphere, just picture this for a second, right? Forget about the troposphere. The stratospheric level over on top of the troposphere, when you've got winds in a circulation over the North Pole polar vortex, when you've got that blowing from west to east, but you've got winds within the same level over the equator blowing in the opposite direction, that tends to have an element of frictional effect on both the jet stream and the polar vortex. And I try to use this analogy to make it a better visual within your head. But think of those easterlies blowing against the westerlies up over the Arctic region here. That's like a spinning top. So you've got the spinning top, you give it a nudge and it starts to create a wobble. And that's what happens when you've got an easterly QBO and you've got the polar vortex up over the Arctic region here. When those easterly winds are blowing, that can create the frictional effect that can slow down those mean zonal winds within the high latitudes. And when you get that, you can start to see a wobble within the polar vortex, and then as that wobble continues, that is then allowing some of the release of cold air from the pole down into the mid-latitude pattern. So I hope that's easy enough for you to understand. Modelling sees a weaker mean zonal wind. So longer term models, let's have a quick look at them then. The weaker the mean zonal wind, which is the winds blowing around the polar vortex, that polar vortex becomes stronger at this time of the year as we lose heat energy from the sun, darkness, and obviously you're furthest away from the sun over the pole during the winter season. I want to show you this here pretty this is quite interesting. So in terms of the strength of the mean zonal wind surrounding the polar vortex, let's have a look and see what the modelling is suggesting. Let's look at the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia. The thick black line is climatological average. The thick blue line is the mean of the model run. And look at how persistently below that blue line is from the black line, pretty much right the way through winter. That suggests that there is a stronger chance of seeing a weakness in those winds surrounding the polar vortex. That's off the Australian model here. Let's look at the CMCC. Same thing. Look at how far below the mean run of the model is from climatology. Skip on then to the DWD model, the German model. Again, very strong weakness in the strength of the mean zonal winds over the pole. So this is suggesting that the polar vortex is weaker than normal. The ECMWF, we do see a bit of a strengthening into the back half of November, for example. It actually goes slightly positive here, which means it's actually stronger than normal. But then we see this sharp drop-off in those mean zonal winds during the December, January, February period. So that's very interesting how it strengthens and then it weakens again in the heart of winter. That's off the ECMWF, by the way. Met Office model doesn't see that strengthening as much compared to the ECMWF, but it remains below average all the way out to the middle portions of January. So there is strong cross-model agreement that the mean zonal winds, essentially the polar vortex, is weaker than normal. You're also increasing the chance, by the way, of sun stratospheric warming as well. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Let's have a quick look and move on then. So I hope that makes sense. Yeah, we're actually on the southern stratospheric warming bit now, so I might as well talk about it then. So we know that there's a strong agreement in the models, the longer term models, that we've got a weaker polar vortex for the upcoming winter season here. We see an increased likelihood with La Nina, negative IOD, and the East QBO. The combination with a weakened polar vortex suggests that we have an increased chance of seeing a sudden stratospheric warming. A sudden stratospheric warming, don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of it because I'd be here all night trying to explain everything. But basically, you've got a major warming within the stratosphere. You usually get a rise of about 50 Celsius within the space of a couple of days. And essentially, all the cold that is bottled up within the stratosphere over the Arctic region gets drained into the lower atmosphere, into the troposphere. And that tends to create the Northern Hemisphere's strongest cold outbreaks. Quite often get cold dropping into North America, Europe, and East Asia. Sometimes you get it focused over North America, not so much in Europe, or perhaps East Asia as well. But when you've got La Nina in combination of with a negative IOD and an East QBO, you increase the chance. And La Nina, that graphic isn't as good as what I thought. I do apologise about that. But basically, the blue line is La Nina, and the red bar is El Nino. But it doesn't really tell me as much as I would like it to. So I will probably move on from that. Unfortunately, I don't know why that has been put in there. So we increase the chance of a weakened polar vortex. We also increase the chance of a sudden stratospheric warming. La Ninas tend to produce sudden stratospheric warmings during the back half of the new year, while El Ninos tend to be a little bit earlier in the year if they do occur. So that is a little fact that I wanted to share with you as well. So while the weaker polar vortex helps slow and wobble those westerly winds over the pole, reducing release of polar air into the middle latitudes, where that cold goes, this is important here. This is where the Arctic Oscillation, North Atlantic Oscillation comes in to play here. Where exactly does that cold come down is going to be critical for us here in the west of Europe here. So while there's a strong relationship between Arctic Oscillation and North Atlantic Oscillation, and two quite often mirror one another, in other words, you get a strong positive Arctic Oscillation, you quite often get a strong positive North Atlantic Oscillation here. So the Arctic Oscillation is obviously over top of the pole. The North Atlantic Oscillation is when you've got the pressure difference between Iceland and the Azores, and the North Atlantic Oscillation is probably more important for us here in Western Europe as opposed to the Arctic Oscillation, because that's more, from a Northern Hemispheric point of view. You tend to want to get a negative Arctic Oscillation because that means there's more cold air getting released into the mid latitudes. When you've got that North Atlantic Oscillation going negative, you tend to get more blocking up towards the Greenland area, North Atlantic. That shuts down the westerly flow, and you tend to get more north to easterly winds coming in, bringing colder weather to our part of the world. But like I say in the article, a negative Arctic Oscillation, so I would expect that a lean towards more of a negative Arctic Oscillation this winter, given the fact that the polar vortex is supposed to be weaker than average. But a positive North Atlantic Oscillation is something that I can't ignore the possibility of. So again, I apologise if I'm repeating myself. This is a nice graphic here showing the positive versus the negative Arctic Oscillation. So positives, cold is bottled up to the north, tend to have much more westerly flow across the northern hemisphere, flooding North America and Europe with mild ocean air. Negative Arctic Oscillation, you've got weaker winds, you've got a more buckled jet stream, and the chance of cold into the mid-latitude pattern. This is the North Atlantic Oscillation then. When it's negative, you get blocking, building northwards over the Atlantic into Greenland. That allows cold air to get drained into eastern North America and western portions of Europe here. So you're pushing that warm pool of air, that high pressure, up into the Greenland area. That creates a trough either side of that ridge, allowing cold. When you've got a positive or even neutral North Atlantic Oscillation, you tend to have a much flatter jet stream. And again, that kind of correlates quite nicely if we look at the graphic above, which is the Arctic Oscillation. You can see here, positive AO, stronger, more flat jet stream, flooding the continents with mild air. You can see that quite nicely mirrored in the North Atlantic Oscillation here. So you can get a negative AO, NAO, which brings cold. You can get negative AO, NAOs that bring cold into Europe, but mild into the North American continent, and vice versa. However, negative NAOs aren't guaranteed with a negative AO, and winters such as 2013-14 and 22-23 are examples of a negative Arctic Oscillation, so cold coming south, but a positive North Atlantic Oscillation. And that is a little bit of a concern this upcoming winter if you want, cold like 09-10. The below graphic, so this is where I get this idea of a negative Arctic Oscillation, giving you the reasons already why, but why we may see more of an Atlantic-driven pattern this year. The below graphics are important of where the cold sets up along the equatorial Pacific and where it's east or central. So the position of the La Nina is very important here, and this is where I'm getting to. The La Nina being in a central Pacific position, if you look at this graphic, a little bit hard to see, I do apologize about that. You have this ridge over the North Pacific. So this graphic here shows North America and Greenland and the North Atlantic here. You've got this positive over the North Pacific. You've got this positive over the Southeast United States. So this is when you've got a west or central based cold pool over the equatorial Pacific. So the La Nina is in the central portion of the Pacific instead of it being in the easterly portion of the Pacific. That quite often, when you've got this central based La Nina, which we have at the moment, unfortunately, tends to lead to more of a positive North Atlantic Oscillation. When you've got an easterly La Nina, so that's the coldest waters closer to South America, that tends to lead to more of a block and negative North Atlantic Oscillation. So that is one factor that may go against us this upcoming winter season, because I do think with a Central Pacific La Nina, you tend to have, Arctic outbreaks into North America. Remember 13-14 winter? But we have a super strong jet that then sends areas of low pressure across the Atlantic and into the west of Europe here. You've actually got a negative height field over the northeast Atlantic, and that tends to fuel areas of low pressure. So you can see this graphic here quite nice. This is the 500 millibar heights showing the east versus west based La Nina. So in an east based La Nina, if you see the left hand graphic, you've got a nice strong block over Greenland here with a trough eastern United States and also western portions of Europe. When you've got a central cold pool within the equatorial Pacific, you've got, a discharge of Arctic air into North America, but you also have negative heights over Greenland as opposed to positive. And you actually got positive heights over the UK and Ireland. So that would actually support a mild winter overall. I kind of would rather have a 2013 mix of stormy and, shots of cold rather than high pressure dominating our pattern. We just have this boring, mild, dismal winter. So I sort of struggle to pay attention to analogues. So I'm moving on now. I've given you the reasons why there might be more of a lean towards a positive North Atlantic Oscillation, which tends to lead to milder conditions out in Western Europe. Let's move on then. Again, this is me building the ideas. I sort of struggle to pay much attention to analogues. So what's analogues? This is years gone by that we try to link up, East QBO, La Nina, Indian Ocean Dipole, etc., etc. You try and blend these together, what years had what, and basically when you've got years with all three, La Nina, East QBO, and negative Indian Ocean Dipole, that tends to be a positive analog. And the problem is that water temperature anomalies are much warmer in recent years, say the past 5 or 6 years. Water temperatures are much warmer than they were back, a decade ago and beyond that. That means that I think some of these classic teleconnections that we look at tend to be a little bit less useful when you've got a widespread warmer world, whether it be in the oceans, the land, or in the atmosphere. The changes to the ocean atmosphere feedback, it changes when you've got a warmer overall ocean surface. And like I said, the traditional teleconnections are less effective compared to colder past, in my opinion. So this update has made me look at more at recent years in terms of positive matches to 2025 compared to maybe back in the earlier 2000s, 1990s, 80s, etc., etc. And there is a few interesting matches to 25 in terms of water temperature anomalies globally. So this is the year 2025. This is off weatherbell.com. You can see here, very warm North Pacific. There's that La Nina signal underneath. Warm North Atlantic with a little ribbon of colder than average. A little bit of a tripole possibly showing up. Tripoles where you've got the warm, cold, warm in the North Atlantic. Sometimes that can lead to a Greenland block, a negative NAO, for example. 2024, so just last year, similar in terms of the water temperatures. Weaker La Nina, I know that, but we've got the very warm waters in the North Pacific. That's been an ongoing thing for the last few years. La Nina, like I say, it never really got going last year. Difference is we've got a lot warm in the Indian Ocean compared to this year. We've got much more of an east warm, colder west situation here, and the North Atlantic is still warmer than average. 2022, we had a negative Indian Ocean dipole, but a stronger La Nina, but a westerly QBO, so those winds in the stratosphere were blowing in the opposite direction back in 2022. Nice similarity with the warm in both the North Pacific and in the North Atlantic. 2020, warm over cold in the Pacific, but neutral Indian Ocean dipole, and again westerly QBO and colder waters near the UK. Once you get beyond 2020, I think there's a greater contrast in terms of warm versus cold. So certainly from a sea surface temperature profile point of view globally, I'm not sure. So yeah, I basically say what I was about to repeat myself there. What about the Madden-Julian oscillation then? So that's obviously the vertical upward motion versus descent within the atmosphere. Where that upward motion goes, so you've got this convective pulse that basically crosses the equatorial Pacific and the Indian Ocean. It moves through the Atlantic in a lesser way. But the engine of the northern hemispheric pattern is generally driven by the tropics in the Indian Ocean and in the Pacific. When you've got the Madden-Julian oscillation, so these are the current temperatures, obviously, but water temperature anomalies are very, very important in terms of where the Madden-Julian oscillation goes. And where the Madden-Julian oscillation goes is very important to the atmosphere. These are the various phases of the MJO. Phases 1, 2, 3 is the Indian Ocean. Then phases 4 and 5 is the maritime continent or Indonesia. And then phases 6, 7, 8 and 1, you've got 1 also in the West Indian Ocean, but the 6, 7 and 8, those are the interesting phases that we would look for colder weather here in western portions of Europe. This is an interesting graphic here. Let's just blow this out instead of up. So this graphic here was shared by Marco Battagna of the Met Office back a few years ago, and this shows quite nicely when you've got this weakened Madden-Julian oscillation. It basically goes within the inner circle. So a weakened Madden-Julian oscillation means there's less influence it can have on the mid to high latitude pattern. When it's more amplified, when it's stronger, there's more release of latent heat into the atmosphere from wherever it's positioned, whether it be the Indian Ocean, Indonesia, or the Pacific. That then tends to have a feedback, leads to the jet stream becoming stronger, weaker, more buckled, more zonal. The MJO is a very important player, and it can be very nicely matched up with the type of pattern that you've got in across the northern hemisphere. So if you're looking for mild, then you're looking for a phase 4 and 5. So that is the MJO over Indonesia. That tends to support a positive North Atlantic Oscillation, mild, unsettled westerlies during the winter season when you've got a phase 4, then into 5. Then you start to see in phase 5, which is the eastern side of the maritime continent, you tend to have high pressure over the UK. And I'm a little bit concerned about that element as well, where you've got the water temperatures warmest surrounding Indonesia. If you have that MJO, which is kind of where it is at the moment, over this region, you tend to have quite mild conditions. You've got higher pressure over Europe, you've got lower pressure up towards Iceland, west-southwesterly flow. If you want cold, if you want blocking, if you want a North Atlantic Oscillation that's negative, as well as the Arctic Oscillation, you want that Madden-Julian Oscillation to get into the Western and Central Pacific. Phases 7 and 8, northerly blocking, Greenland high pressure, negative NAO, cold UK winter. So let's look at the current sea surface temperatures. And this is my concern, that look at where the coldest waters are over the equatorial Pacific. That, in a sense, is going to... the MJO is not going to be as attracted to this part of the world when you've got those water temperatures cold in the Central Pacific. This is where it's important to have an east-based La Nina, where you've got the water temperatures coldest towards South America. That then leads to something warmer into that phase 6, 7, and 8. So you get where I'm coming from here. When you've got this west to central Pacific-based Madden-Julian Oscillation, and the MJO was attracted, by the way, to warmer waters. Look at where the warmest waters are. East Indian Ocean, so phases 3, that creates stormy. That's a stormy phase. And then Indonesia. And this region here around Indonesia is an incredible part of the world, because this actually can control Earth's climate, Earth's weather systems, by simply having this MJO over the Indonesia region here. So with the cold waters extending towards the dateline, that would focus the Madden-Julian Oscillation over the maritime continent during the upcoming winter season here. That would tend to then lead to the potential of westerlies and possible storminess as well. Another factor to consider is we've got a warm North Pacific. You have, with La Nina, you tend to have higher pressure up over the North Pacific, the Gulf of Alaska. That tends to lead to colder outbreaks. Remember that weaker polar vortex driving Arctic air into the United States. But because of the MJO likely to be focused over the East Indian Ocean or the maritime continent, yeah, we'll get the cold air into North America. But with the MJO not in the right position, you tend to have a stronger jet across the Atlantic, and then stormy weather, or at least even higher pressure near the UK, and the North Atlantic Oscillation is going to be positive or neutral, not negative, when you've got the MJO in phases 3, 4, or 5. Hope that's easy enough to understand here. This is a negative element to the upcoming winter forecast here. Moving on then, because I'm conscious of the fact that we're pushing an hour. I don't want to go on too far beyond the hour. I still have 71 concurrent viewers at the moment here. Remember to hit that like button. That would be greatly appreciated. The channel's now hit 7,000 subscribers. Let's get to 7,100 and beyond that in the next month or so here. It would be greatly appreciated. I hope this is easy enough to understand. Hope I'm explaining it as best I can here. So this is the nuts and bolts. This is the thinking behind the forecast. rather than just saying it's going to be this or it's going to be that. I'm giving you the evidence to support why I'm thinking a certain thing. Solar cycles. Well, remember, we've just came off a solar maximum. We'll look at Richard Trott's latest thinking in a second. I shared in the previous update a PowerPoint presentation that I kind of skipped through. Probably didn't do it justice, but never mind. I know Richard, isn't going to mark me down for it, I don't think. But, guy's terrific in terms of some of his knowledge with regards to solar activity and whatnot. I want to show you this little graphic here. Remember, we came off a solar maximum last year, so we're kind of coming off that solar max. We're nowhere near a solar minimum by any stretch. What influences does that solar activity have on the polar vortex? Well, high solar activity tends to lead to a contracted polar vortex during the winter time. So it actually means it's usually a stronger polar vortex. You tend to have, in low solar activity, a weaker polar vortex. But focus on the high solar activity, because that is where we're closer to as opposed to low solar activity. Tend to have more zonal flow. So we may get that as well, remember, in the Atlantic in particular. Not so much North America. Again, 2013-14 winter is something that I'm thinking about. Even recent winters that have been hyper stormy across the UK, we've had major cold shots into North America. That also increases the thermal gradient and a stronger jet as a consequence. Remember, the jet stream is driven by contrasting air masses between warm and cold. Remember, stratospheric warmings tend to be more during westerly QBO years, which is interesting. So that kind of contradicts a little bit, but this is only taking into consideration high solar activity. There's more variability and there's less snow most winters. So purely based on solar activity and not including La Nina, East QBO, negative Indian Ocean dipole, you tend to have stratospheric warmings in the West QBO, more variability overall, less snow, more zonal flow, and a stronger polar vortex. I wanted to add that in at least anyway. The total solar effect, this is quite interesting when you've got an active sun, net warm and geomagnetic storms in high latitudes. We've seen the aurora in recent times. Solar diffused cosmic ray effect on low cloud. So there's less clouds during solar maximum. UV increases by 6 to 8%, warming through ozone chemistry. Low middle latitude. This is, by the way, this is from Dr. This is off weatherbell.com, Dr. Joe DeLeo. The name escaped me there for a second, but this is from weatherbell.com. This is from Joe DeLeo's blog posts. So the active sun increases UV by 68%. Brightness is much stronger during solar maximum as well here. This is some earlier thinking that I still go by in terms of the visual that I have for this potential winter. And we'll close off with Richard's stuff in just a second here. But an easterly QBO induced weaker polar vortex, a negative Arctic oscillation due to that weaker polar vortex, and south displaced polar jet stream. So yes, we might still have more of a zonal westerly component to the upcoming winter season, but it would be further south, and therefore you've got an opportunity of colder air and even snowier than average conditions across the northern UK when you've got this south displaced jet due to blocking up into the Arctic region here. So that's central La Nina. MJO is likely focused over the Indian Ocean and Indonesia. Phase 1 and 2, stormy. Phase 3 and 4, mild, neutral to positive North Atlantic oscillation. Has that made sense? I hope it has. And like I said, this is fair and balanced. This is not me with an agenda in terms of I want cold and snow. I want an 09-10 winter. I love winter time. I love cold and snow. But I have to be honest with what I'm saying. So good evening to our very own Richard Trott. I hope you are enjoying your evening. I believe you're meeting up with a friend for a little while, Richard. I'm getting to your slides, are your latest couple of charts, graphics that you sent me a wee while ago here. So I'll end with that, but I just want to quickly go through the chat. So good evening to Luca, good evening to Frogs Legs Matthew, Braemar and Ballard are D-side and Donside Weather. Chris A. Have we got anybody else that I haven't given a shout out to? Yon 2044. We have Hebridean. Did I say hello to Hebridean? I don't know if I have, but I have seen you in the chat. Yes, understand and appreciate. Sorry, just missed it. Yes, understand and appreciate the concerns regarding water shortages south of the border. Not good sign regarding the winter, Chris A. Could be quite a volatile winter, I have to be honest, with this type of situation. Remember, this isn't a winter forecast. This is, again, just me sharing the evidence before I release the official thoughts. We've got the GHGCGHI7D. Good evening to yourself. Yeah, cool handle. Milder and wetter winter would be my guess. See, again, I don't necessarily want to jump too much on the mild theme. It might not be as mild as you think, believe it or not. Also, has to be remembered that the Arctic sea ice extent, the melt, was one of the highest in the past decade. So we had least amount of Arctic sea ice melt. Usually occurs during the month of September. It's one of the least that we've seen in the past decade. That can have an effect as well, by the way, in terms of the amount of available coal that is regenerated during the autumn season and then into the winter season. Lucas saying, hello, Mark. Is it possible to be a Serbia this winter? January 26 minus 20. That is a good point, Luca. And I've not actually made mention of this. We could actually have a fairly significant winter in central and eastern areas of Europe here. I could visualize that. I could see that being the case. But I want to re-emphasize this point. I am not necessarily suggesting that this is a mild winter. I'm leaning towards unsettled, potentially stormy, but also volatility, also back and forth as well. I do think we're going to get a negative North Atlantic oscillation. I do think we're going to get intrusions of Arctic air, snowy conditions, etc. I think we may lean more snowier than average across the north of the UK. Probably less snowy compared to average across the south of the UK. Unfortunately, I know folks in the south, I know Paul James and other folks will probably be a bit disappointed to hear that. But 2013-14 was actually quite a snowy winter in the mountains of Scotland because the jet tended to be further south. We had a lot of systems coming across the south of the UK. Anyway, let's kind of round up. But before we round up, let's get into what Richard sent me a little bit earlier. So this is obviously moving on from what I shared the PowerPoint presentation back at the end of the update number 1. So this is just a small update. So this is from Richard, just a small update on solar activity. And I hope I do this again justice, Rich. As of October 13th, 2024, solar cycle 25 is averaging 40% more spots per day than cycle 24. So I believe that's, so cycle 25 is 40%, got 40% more sunspots per day compared to cycle 24 at the same point in the cycle. And that was back on the 13th of October, 2013. So October 24, we're at the same position as solar cycle 25 as 24. That was back on the 13th of October 2013. Sorry about that. We reached as predicted solar maximum October 2024. So a year ago we were at solar maximum, with a lot of experts predicting the max would be in 2025. So we reached the maximum in solar cycle 25 at least 6 months ahead of schedule, if not nearer a year ahead of schedule. So note that both the updated prediction and the 2019 NOAA, NASA, ISES panel prediction apply only to solar cycle 25. Solar cycle 26 is expected to begin sometime between January 2029 and December 2032. Remember, solar maximum tends to lead to milder conditions globally. Solar minimum tends to lead to colder temperatures globally, but also increased blocking over the high latitudes and whatnot. I always revert back to 09-10 winter. That came just at the tail end. I think it was 2008 solar minimum, and then we had that 3 spells of winter conditions in a row that was pretty notable after a scant period during the 1990s. So spotless days, the current stretch of spotless days is 0 days. We've seen 0 days in 2025 so far, 24, 2023. You have to go back to 2022, the last time we had a spotless day, so we had no sunspots on the surface of the sun. So that's quite notable here. So 0 days of sun spotless days in the last 3 years. So the forecast, solar activity is expected to remain low, with a slight chance for isolated M-class flares, R1, R2, minor moderate flares through the 26th of October. This is a chart showing previous solar cycles to this year and the similar amount of monthly smooth sunspot numbers. And you can see here that the light green colour is cycle 25. So we are up there with regards to a fairly active solar cycle in 2025. We reached the maximum a year ago this month, and we will eventually continue to see a decrease in solar activity over the next 2-3 years or so, likely to reach the end of the cycle in 2029, between 2029 and 2032, I think, if I'm right in saying. So, yep, that is it, folks. I feel a little bit knackered, I must admit. That is slightly over the hour mark, but I thought there was a lot of important information to get through. And, I think you can admit and agree that there is a lot of interesting aspects to consider with regards to this winter. I haven't even shared the longer range models with you, but I will do. I'm going to do that in the European Outlook this upcoming week. I'm going to look at what the modelling is suggesting for the upcoming winter season. So I think I've covered enough in today's update that can be done in a separate video here. So stay tuned for the upcoming week. Hit that subscribe button if you're interested in winter weather and you want to know a little bit more about why we're getting certain types of weather. Hopefully this is the channel for you. And please hit that like button before you leave today's live stream here. It really does help me out. Help me to get over 100 likes. That means that it just provides a little bit more reach for this live stream on the YouTube platform. Did you enjoy that? I hope you did. I hope it made sense. I hope it was enjoyable, and I hope it just gives you something to kind of look towards with regards to all these different teleconnections and elements and aspects. And we shall wait and see. Thanks, Mark. Epic live stream. Massive thank you, by the way, to Richard, to Paul. Thanks to Richard Chaw for the fantastic information he shares. Fantastic new graphic for Rogan's European Outlook as well. Thank you to Richard for that as well. I really do. I massively appreciate Richard's support to myself, to my channel, and it does not go unnoticed, my friend. So thank you very much. Thank you to Paul James as well for his ongoing support through moderating. It is fantastic stuff. I do also want to thank my wife for all the support that she provides, not just for the channel, but having the patience to live with me as well. So, thank you to everybody as well for taking part, for watching, take the time out of your Saturday evening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. A big tropical outlook tomorrow. We have got I don't know if it's already a hurricane, probably is a hurricane. Devastating situation that is likely unfolding now over the Jamaica, Hispaniola, Central Caribbean area. We've got a multi-day extreme event of both wind, rain, storm surge. There will be widespread deaths, unfortunately, I think, anyway, but our thoughts and prayers are with folks that are going to be affected by Melissa. I will do a good, lengthy video on Melissa and potential impacts in tomorrow's European Outlook, so stay